And you are still live on Newsfile. It's on Joy 99.7 FM. It's also on the Joy News channel. The first part has just gone by. We dealt with corruption, a very heated conversation. Of course, corruption is always controversial, but we're moving on to education. And this year, there are many themes and stories that emerged that dominated our headlines when it came to education. I recall the very explosive comments made by a good friend of mine about the education system at the tertiary level not being fit for purpose. That generated a lot of controversy, and we talked about it for quite a while. I'm talking about Senor Hosey's controversy that university education has simply stopped being relevant. I don't know where we are with the reform that were promised. And then we also heard about CSC, etc. But listen, I'm going to get my panelists to tell me what their own key education stories are, and then we'll flow from there. My panelists are Bright Simmons. You heard him. He was part of the corruption conversation. I don't envy him because he's almost part of every single bit of topic we're going to have today. Bright?
Thank you.
Thank you very much for staying with us. Kofi Abochi is the past dean, Gimpa Law School, and partner, Access Legal Solicitors. And Kofi, this past week, the Chief Justice nominee mentioned your name as one of those people who he sat in conclave with to try and, fix the legal education. You didn't tell me that before, but now we know. And so when it comes to that, I'm going to expect a lot from you. The Chief Justice himself has laid the burden at your doorstep. Samuel Kujota Blackwell is also here with us, ladies and gentlemen. He is MP Nortong. Hello, Sami.
Hi, Evans.
How are you doing?
I'm good.
And Merry Christmas to you in the belated sense, but also Happy New Year as we look forward.
Many
and definitely, Dr. Yao Osei Duchum is a Deputy Education Minister. Doc, I just say,
good.
Nice one. So Doc is here and seated. My panelists are here, but my audience are also live and seated. I think you've been pretty patient with us from the beginning. So give yourself a round of applause, ladies and gentlemen. Thank you very much for joining us here in your numbers. And a few of you I need to acknowledge. Dr. Gideon Boako is seated there hiding, but I spotted you from the Vice President's office. Also with us is John Jinapo, who is already looking at the documents and seeing what damage he can do. Seated right next to him is Professor Henson, who was very passionate about the conversation surrounding the relevance of university education. And my good friend who wanted to leave, but I managed to ground him, Dr. Kojo Asante. Doc, now that I've mentioned your name, you can't disappear anymore. Jemima Nunu is a good friend of mine, United folk, red in blood, red in shirt, but struggling. Don't worry, we'll come back very soon. Joe Jackson is here from Dallas Finance as well. Joe, thank you for staying with us. Samuel, let me start with you. What were your key big education stories this past year?
Well, thank you, Evans, for having me, and season's greetings to you, to the panel, and to our distinguished audience. There are a number of issues that come up. What we in the NDC have described the poor implementation of free SHS, which with its attendant double-track system, which clearly has a debilitating effect on quality. It's a matter of concern to us, and our flag bearer has been clear that he will abolish double-track if given the opportunity with a return of the NDC.
So free SHS and attendant problems?
Yes, the attendant problems.
Okay.
Number two, the new education reform. You see, we took the view when we were in power that Ghana has gone through too many educational reforms, from the 1821 edition by the colonialists to the 1961 reform by Commerce as a Related Development Program, the 1966 educational reform, 1974 educational reform, the 1987 educational reform, Jobo-led educational reform. Then you had the PNDC educational reform under the PND, Prime Lieutenant Jerry John Rawlings. Then the last one being the 2007 Anamwa education reform, which President Kufuor started implementing in 2008 with the new Education Act 778. We held a view when we were in power that enough of all the reforms and the ups and downs and all of that. Let there be stability, and let's rather focus on the contents of quality. You have a situation where you have, at the time, more than 4,000 schools under trees. You had the textbook to people ratio, one textbook being shared by 3 people. If you look at the MS data, the most authoritative data source on education
We'll come
in
to
Ghana.
the details shortly, but just touch on...
So we were wondering why there ought to be a new educational reform
specifically
which has been spearheaded now. And more than a year after that, no textbooks. We are back to the same issue of the ingredients of quality. Okay. Quality teachers, trained professionals who are motivated, labs, textbooks, the TLMs, and all of those things that are not being delivered. So it's been more of form than substance.
So let's see that
that'll be the second issue.
The reform issues, teacher licensure exams, the CSC was part of this whole thing. Yeah. Lack of textbooks for you. Which one else in the reform specific issues there for you?
Yeah, so the whole gamut of it. The whole gamut.
So we'll come to the specifics shortly.
And certainly the attempts also to review the computerized school selection placement system.
Which is a
that
big
also
deal.
caused a lot of headaches
that you guys
to parents.
sabotage the system. We'll come to that. I look forward to it. Kofi, what were your key education issues for you this year?
Well, as someone involved in legal education, I think it's clear that it's the question of the legal educational reforms and the way it's been handled, and some will argue mishandled. I think it's, I have been observing with keen interest and with some regrets at the same time, given the fact that the debate has been framed in extreme terms. And whenever you frame debate in extreme terms, you tend to lose the realities of the ground. I mean, the middle ground, which is actually what things ought to be. The General Legal Council, which is supposed to be the regulatory body, slept for so many years, and then woke up one day, and like the sleeping giant that wakes up, when it wakes up, the sleeping giant tends to stampede. And so the General Legal Council, which was for so many years dormant as far as the real reform was concerned, appeared suddenly to be overreaching as far as many people were concerned. On the other hand of the spectrum, we had the debate fueled by issues of emotions, and people who cannot detach themselves from the real issues that actually affect the legal education. Now I can say, and when I speak, sometimes people are surprised because as a former dean of a school, people expect me to be the person who's advocating for opening the doors and opening the gates. But as I indicated, the problems are not, the reality is that what we confront is an issue that has to be looked at from a long-term perspective. Part of the problems, as far as the reform is concerned, is that we're still speaking of the reform of legal education without clarity as far as the future is concerned. Now, any reform that does not, or that is not guided by a roadmap mindset is invariably bound to fail. Because part of the problem is that people who are supposed to be affected by the reform cannot see their way clear. I think when you speak to students today, the biggest challenge that they confront as far as legal education is concerned is that there's no sense of what will happen tomorrow. And there's a sense of things being done incrementally and being done accidentally and sometimes spontaneously. And when people have their futures guided by this, there's a sense of despondency and anxiety. So I think for you, invariably for this year.
I'll reserve that for a bit of comment towards the end. That's the last one before we get to the audience shortly. I'll jump you for obvious reasons. Deputy Education. Let's come to Mr. Bryce Simmons. What were the key education issues for you?
It's quite obvious that given all the controversy that had heralded the free SHS program, that its developments and its evolution will be a major issue. And it was. It didn't disappoint. So free SHS implementation challenges, which everybody could have foreseen, for me was a very major development. Given that I also have an interest in technology, I was very interested in following the computer selection placement problems that arose. So those two will be my key.
So you aligned on that. And so let me come to the details now with the deputy. I think they've given you a sense of where they are.
No, he's fired a warning shot.
He has, and that is why I'm starting with you to start. I'm going to come back to him to get into detail.
I don't get it.
It was warning shot, but the hail of bullets will come very soon.
And it was all over the place.
So let's go there.
Because you see, I think we've done some great things in this country. And if I was sitting at home, I would lament for this country, but we need not do that. Let's look at the bright spots and say that these were challenges, and we can together fight those challenges and overcome them and create a beautiful country. So as I hear my brother lamenting and talking about all the negatives, I think that's what we hear all the time, a number of times when we lament about situation, and then we lambast our leaders. I call it double L. and then we all go to sleep after some time.
So how are we fixing the challenges?
So let me tell you this. When you look at education, and I'm glad I saw the theme that you gave in terms of Ghana's global competitiveness. If you look at the challenges of education in this country within a global competitive framework, you'll be able to recommend some solutions and be able to confront them and solve them. For example, 2015, the last time I saw the PISA score, Program for International Student Assessment, Ghana was last, and we left. We shouldn't have left. We should have gotten around it and began to question ourselves, why are students not thinking critically? And why are we assessed poorly in reading, mathematics, and science? Vietnam did not quit, and Vietnam now is one of the countries that is scoring very high on PISA. We quit and said that we are the last, therefore forget about your exams. We are going back in 2021. And we have developed a curriculum that will respond to the challenges of PISA.
What is PISA?
The Program for International Student Assessment.
For once,
it's an international assessment,
of Christmas.
International assessment that enables you to know how critically your students are thinking. In fact, Friedman, economists, have said that if students are in a generation, if they score proficient on 420 score, if they get 420, which is a proficient score, during their lifetime, the GDP of their countries will grow 33 times. Let's say to grow 5 times. It's a great opportunity. But we went in there and we stopped. Let me tell you, when you look at somebody who knows a bit about education, when you look at the education system and talk about issue of access, issue of quality and relevance, these are the 3 things you have to take a look at. Now, in the issue of access, EPKIP did a fantastic job. We were able to assess ourselves. Primary and junior high, we are doing fantastically well. But in 2009, the gross secondary enrollment ratio was 36.1% when NDC took over. They did a fantastic job moving it to 50.1% when they left. 14% in 8 years. Within 2 years of Nana Addo Dankwa Akufo-Addo, we've grown it 12% to 62%. This is a shining light. This is a message that the people of Ghana need to hear. Yes, in the process.
There's a question for clarity.
Which cycle for gross enrollment rate for which
secondary?
Cycle? Secondary.
Yes. You see, this is moving us up into global competitiveness, thinking about you have a critical mass of your people who have been educated. Now you look at tertiary, and it's not good. 16.19% compared to 93.6% for South Korea. When we were independent, of course, 1960 we were better than them. But now we've lagged behind and we are 16.19. It's nothing to write home about. So when you talk about education in this country, let's situate it within the context of how you move your country forward in a knowledge economy. I've said always that in a knowledge economy, education is not a piece of the puzzle, it's the whole puzzle. So we need to be looking at these issues that are confronting us. Our human capital index is nothing to write home about. Even though it's one of the highest in Africa, why should we use the African norm as something that makes us happy? 44.44, which means that 56% of the human capacity of the children growing up today, 56% is going to be wasted if nothing happens. Within this context, we should be able to look at what are we doing right, what is it that is wrong, and then hold the bull by the horn. And so when you talk about we don't want to do too many reforms, my brother, this world is not waiting for us. The world is not waiting for us.
Are the reforms delivering?
Yes. Reforms have just begun.
The problems
you see, when you talk about reforms, as I said, you have to look at access. You see, Brookings Institution recently did a study published by Rebecca Winthrop. And it talked about, the title of the study was called Leapfrogging Inequality. They said that if we do not change the way we are doing things in developing countries, it's going to take 120 years before we can catch up with the developed nations. Are they going to be waiting for us? We are in a crisis situation where we have to look at everything that we are doing. Sometimes I'm misquoted by saying that we haven't created a robust system. Yes, we have not. We have a situation where, for example, if I'm a headmaster of a school, I can be promoted even though I can get a 0% on WASI. 50% of our high schools, and to be coming up in a ranking publication that the minister has authorized, 50% of our high schools have 10% or less of our students passing the WASI. But because some of us, our children will not go to Yachty Pramso and other schools, and you go to a disco, they do very well because Wesley get about 99% pass. So your children do very well. The children of the poor who happen to go to certain schools where you have 4% pass rate cannot wait for us. And if we don't do that, there's going to be a price for inequality. So when we talk about this reform, let us all come together and see what can we do
let me
change
go around
the fortunes of this country.
I'll come to you shortly. Forgive me, but I want to go to that's his response to you.
Yeah, I mean there are a few I think matters that need straightening. First, the matter to do with the gross enrollment ratio at the second cycle level. The correct figure is 52.7%.
You dispute that?
What's the source? He said authoritative emis.
Okay,
emis is 52.
As of when you are living.
Yeah, as of when we're living.
When you were living.
When we're living.
They gave me, of course, 2%.
When we're living.
I'll give it to you.
Yeah, so 52. Yeah, 52.7%. And it's significant to note that we moved it from 33.9% in 2008 to 52.7%. And between 2001 and 2008, the jump was not that impressive. It was 25.5% to 33.9%. You know, less than 10 percentage points. So we need to correct that. Then I must also correct the PISA analysis. You see, PISA is an OECD analysis which does not feature Ghana until 2015, when what they did was to have a combination of tests, including TIMSS, including the AU's own assessment and all of that. So it is not accurate to say that Ghana was measured by PISA. The last country on the PISA ranking is the Dominican Republic, not Ghana. Dominican Republic was last.
2015 was Ghana.
No, 2015. No. You can this on the website. You can fact check. You can fact check on the OECD website.
My producers are fact checking.
PISA rankings 2015. The country that was last was Dominican Republic.
So Ghana was
not Ghana. Ghana was not ranked by PISA. Ghana was ranked by a combination of, including TIMSS, including the AU assessment, all of that, in some combined assessment.
So Ghana was not on PISA.
So when you say that, Ghana was not on PISA.
Okay,
Ghana was not assessed. Ghana was not assessed by PISA.
I saw it today.
The last country, but it's a misconception that has been carried since 2015.
Okay.
And we sought to correct it when we were at the Ministry of Education, that it's not fair to do this to your own country.
So let's go to the reforms.
It's Dominican Republic that was last, not Ghana. But you see, I think that we should look at...
Ghana was not on it?
No, Ghana was not on it. And I mean, viewers, listeners can check, the PISA rankings. Ghana was not on it at all. The last country was Dominican Republic.
Let's more progress. We'll check that. I mean, that's factual, so it's easy to check.
I mean, I'm sure your producers can look at
it. They're checking that. Yeah. Let's move on to the substance of the
If you look at the G category of countries, it was only Georgia and Germany that were assessed.
Don't worry about that. It's been checked. Let's move on.
You see, I think that we should go back to my preliminary remarks about, focus on the substance. I mean, I agree with my brother, Dr. Educhum, that the world is not waiting for us. We need to really be aggressive about the ingredients of quality. The way to achieve that is not by the constant reforms and focused, on form instead of substance. And that's why when we were at the ministry, if you look at our record, for 4 consecutive years, Ghana was adjudged the best WASI performing country. We have lost that now. 4 consecutive years. Now Nigeria has taken over. That must be a worry to us. 2016.
No, don't worry. 2016. Just make a note of it so that
if you look at if you look at the 2016 BEC performance, that was the best in our history. The President Mahama BEC performance 2016 was the best. You had 3,994 candidates scoring above the 500 mark. Before then, only 11 students had gotten above 500. And Dr. Educhim will confirm that. 3,994. It had never happened. And it was all because of the investments. If you look at the EMIS data, and by the way, EMIS
investments in what exactly?
Good. Primary school investment, for example. Whereas the MIS data reveals that between 2001 and 2008, we built 2,417 schools, basic schools. The Mills Mahama era built 4,139. You remember the program to eliminate schools under trees? We did 60%. These days, you don't hear about what we are doing about schools under trees. I'm a rural MP. He is a rural MP. Look at the conditions under which our children are learning. It's not sitting in Accra and doing highfalutin reforms and all that would address the issues. It's going down there and fixing such a basic fundamental problem. Eliminating schools under trees, making sure the schools have computers, that they have TLMs, that you're addressing teacher absenteeism. When we got to the Ministry of Education, teacher absenteeism was 27%. Can you imagine? One of the highest anywhere in the world. We reduced it to 9% by the time we're leaving office. You know, so these are the interventions that are critical. If you look at MIS data again on the recruitment of professional teachers, His Excellency John Ajekum Kufuor, within 8 years, recruited 24,957 teachers. The MIS data reveals that the Mills Mahama era, we recruited 51,000, hoping 51,027 teachers. So these are the contents of quality that I'm talking about. Look at what we did with SIP, the Secondary Education Improvement Project. He talks about the low-performing second cycle institutions, which is a very critical point. So we approached the World Bank with our homegrown program and said that, look, we need funding to address the widening inequality gap. So give us $156 million. We submitted a very convincing proposal, which now has been replicated in Kenya, Uganda, and other countries. The World Bank came fully on board. Fortunately, I'm told that they have even renegotiated and got some more money. They are continuing with the program. So we got $156 million to support our community day school project. We built 23 out of that. Then we identified 125 low-performing schools. Those schools that are not in the grade A, the Presex, the Fancy Films, the Discos, the Ogascos, and all of that. You know, Kojo Yankson is here, so if I don't mention Ogasco, he will take Bright and I on. You know, we are the 99 Presec year group, so I'm happy to see Bright. You know, 125 schools, and check the results. You're beginning to see that. So we called it the facility and quality improvement for those 125 schools. So they don't have labs, you're providing labs, you're providing, you know, computers, additional classroom facility, additional dormitories, and all of that. Those are the interventions we made. Then we noticed that skills was a major issue. TVET was collapsing. So we secured $50 million for the Skills Development Fund, then another $140 million from the Africa Development Bank to do the development of skills for industry projects. And you notice that we have been constructing in every region a state-of-the-art technical institute under the DISIP, the Africa Development Bank, you know, supported DISIP, the development of skills for industry projects. You know, and you feed that into the conversion of the polytechnics to technical universities to totally, you know, overhaul the perception and, you know, the whole, you know, mindset which was rather degrading of technical vocational education in our country. So we focus on the contents of quality and not just, you know, reforms,
you have to forgive
announcing them, and we walk away.
But I'll come back to you at the tail end, because I'm sure there'll be issues that you still have to respond to.
So there are lots.
Don't worry. I know you're very good at taking notes. So
I'm not feeling like I'm working in the same ministry that he worked at.
No. So I'll come to you, Bright.
I don't see most of the things he's talking about.
I'll come to you. Let me hear from Bright.
So on the issue of PISA, I mean, both of them are right to an extent, in the sense that we have not had the formal PISA tests administered, because you're not a full partner of the OECD program. But we have had PISA rankings because we had information that was available, and that was used, as well as TIMS and others that he's already mentioned. So I think both of them are right to a certain extent. What is more interesting, though, is I want to react to the Honorable Deputy Minister's comments around lamentations, because it struck me a little bit. I feel that we lament in this country because they don't do what we tell them, and we employ them. And
I mean, we the people.
Yes. And when we consistently tell them what we want and we consistently complain about things that they do and they refuse, I don't see any other option than to lament. I mean, how do you keep quiet or rejoice or revel or praise and the likes of it when your employees consistently defy public opinion?
Now, if you do that, I get you. He's a politician. Lamenting and lambasting. He's a politician, lamenting and lambasting. No, not you. You're a citizen, of course. You shouldn't be quiet. But he's a politician.
Okay.
Lamenting.
Clarification.
See, you are fascinated about taking me on.
Okay. So I think now I have permission to lament.
Please.
Yes, fully.
When I make the point that we have a learning problem in policymaking in this country, what I mean is that there are problems that we've known about the way we've structured decision making and the public's engagement with our problems, the public sector's engagement with our problems for many years. And it keeps repeating. Let me give an example. For as far as I have been checking, and that is quite a while, maybe a decade and a half, we've consistently decided as a country to deprioritize policy development, planning, monitoring, and evaluation in our ministries. So as far as most of these political decision makers are concerned, that think tank role, in-house think tank role, that the PPMEs are supposed to play, by convention and by design, have always been considered secondary. It will shock you to recognize that the budget for PPME, the entire planning, policy development, monitoring, and evaluation, the piece of the system that is supposed to make sure that the stuff that they are doing are being done well, the entire budget is $70,000. And we live in a country where we spend that on vehicles for inspectors who can only inspect 60 schools or thereabout a year out of 40,000 basic schools. We spend money to buy cars for a so-called National Inspectorate Board.
It's changed now.
Well, National Inspectorate Authority.
It's changed now.
Well, the truth of the matter remains that inspections in schools remain under 1% of coverage. It is, because I looked at your medium-term expenditure framework, which you and the Minister of Finance collectively did, and you still expected in 2019 to inspect less than 1% of schools. That is a fact.
No.
Well, you have to then tell us where else we should source data about what actual expectations are happening.
Definitely tell
Because I have given you my source.
And I'll give you my
If you
source.
look at the medium-term expenditure framework, you're inspecting less than 1% of schools. The second fact is that when you are spending less than $70,000 or thereabouts doing the entire planning function of a ministry, the true implication of that is that you are not interested. Because it's not possible in the current context. We live in a country where maybe 12% to 15% thereabout of private teachers are trained in the basic schools. I have been looking at those statistics for a decade and a half. They have shifted very, very ephemerally. So when we say that we have to lament because year in and year out, the most important things don't get attention, we have very strong justification. This is a country that officially has a policy to promote technical education and spends 2% of its relative resources on technical education and vocational education. Despite the official policy being that technical and vocational education are increasingly integral to our path out of underdevelopment. So what am I saying? What I'm saying is that there's incoherence and there's a lack of learning. There's an inability to learn year to year. Even after we've had all these debates, and after we've highlighted the same problems, they still do a kind of budgeting process, they still do a kind of policy development process which ignores public input. That's my claim. My claim is that public input is frequently ignored. I mentioned free SHS as very, very important. We had a debate in this country. I was in the middle of that debate. In some instances, I was a certified rabble-rouser in that debate. And we made it very clear that all the congestion issues that are currently being complained about were entirely foreseeable. The government comes to power knowing very well that there's been a lot of estimates about the likely number of new entrants that will happen if they continue to pursue the policy in the way that they wanted to pursue. The government itself anticipated about 183,000 new entrants. The government decided to then implement a policy to revamp infrastructure and to buy teaching resources and materials. The government decided that 13,000 bank bursts was enough in a country where 60% of the student population, or at the very least the institutions themselves, are boarding or boarding focused.
Yeah.
If 60% is the enrollment capacity for boarding houses, let's even say 40%. Whatever it is, you're not expecting less than 70,000 people in the boarding houses. Why will you buy 13,000 bank beds? That's about 26,000 spaces. Knowing very well that given the decision that we've taken to allow everyone to come into the system without facing it beyond the phasing that was done, which was a year focused, without deciding that we're going to do spatial, geographic discrimination of any kind, we're going to get these numbers. Yeah. Why will we underinvest? In my view, deliberate underinvestment. Well, that is the truth.
The truth from where?
The truth from the numbers that you yourself published, in terms of how many bank beds you bought, in terms of how many...
I don't know where you are getting that.
Where am I getting from? It's from the same information that you put out.
No, maybe you got the wrong information.
How can I get it wrong?
Because
that's information that was published.
Where are the students sleeping?
That is why we are seeing students on the floor.
No.
I have sent people with cameras and I will put that information
out. You can send people.
There are people sleeping on the floor in schools in Ghana.
It's not true.
What are you saying about I have sent cameras to the schools and you're telling me it's not true.
Okay.
You can't accuse me of lying like that.
I mean,
there are people that have the integrity to speak as well. Anyway, my point is very simple.
I'll come to you definitely.
Let me make my point. Yeah. My point is that we continue to complain about these things. Three of them. One is incoherence between the policy intent and the actual execution. Where we say this is what we want to do, and then when you do the things, they don't coincide. We've complained about them for so many years in this country. And it didn't start with your administration. This is something we've been doing for a decade and a half. Second, we have a tendency in this country not to learn. So we do something a decade ago where there was a problem, there were publications, people agitate, and in the decade we come back and do the same thing. That is a society, particularly a leadership, that is not willing to learn from its mistakes. Last, public input into policy making. We have a tendency to fight everyone who has dissent, to marginalize their views and their claims, to constantly go under attack on the perception that they are anti-government, or that somehow they are bitter, or that they bear ill will. When in fact, the reason why any of us engage, there's absolutely no benefit whatsoever. If it wasn't for the fact that many of us are genuinely concerned about the country that we live in, and we know for a fact that we cannot live anywhere else except in this country and be treated and accorded dignity.
Before I go on, I'll come to you. Bullet for me what your proposed solutions are, because we already have free SHS.
Okay.
We have, as a part of the solution for the problems it's created, double track. We're still going into 2020, and you know, school has to go on. What will be your bullet, in 1 minute, solution for the problem?
There are very concrete proposals already made by several organizations, including my own, that the policymakers need to actively engage with. One argument that we've made is that when you take programs like the Secondary Education Improvement Program, where we are spending maybe $153 million to try and build new schools and the likes of it, all that money should be completely redirected to congested schools. That the policy should be that congested schools take priority, not the greenfield projects.
Okay.
Absolutely.
That's one.
Number two, we have a situation where we continue to implement new cosmetic reforms. So I don't agree with my colleague Kujeto when he says that reforms are not important. There are cosmetic reforms and there are important reforms. An example of a cosmetic reform is the decision to unite the National Accreditation Board and the National Council for Tertiary Education. It makes no difference. Not in a situation where we intend indeed to make curricular development an independent process. So those are cosmetic reforms as far as I'm concerned. But there are important, deep reforms, particularly around accountability. When it comes to accountability, projects like Gallup and the rest are scratching at the surface. We have fundamental issues with school inspections, which we need to fix. Okay. Last contribution. We have a situation also where, as far as I'm concerned, and many people agree with me, the current focus on technical education is not clear. Not clear in terms of how much resources relative to other investments that we make, we devote to it. And not clear whether indeed the old idea that when you exit JSS or JHS, you should be able to enter into a trade is a major piece of our educational strategy. It's not clear to me yet.
Okay.
Do we want that, or do we want to create a situation where, like some have argued on the PPP
How
side?
much of our GDP should we devote into that? That's
Not GDP, I mean, talking about the educational budget.
A budget.
It depends on the strategy. If the strategy is still that when you leave JHS, you should be able to enter a trade, they're not less than 10% in my view.
Okay, good. Kofi, your point on this, where we are with the free SHS, etc. Well, what's your view? Are the proposed solutions that government is already implementing fixing it for you? And if not, what should be the approach?
I'll start first of all by saying, as I listen to the former deputy minister and the current deputy minister, I worry about the exact fear that I've always had, the absence of consensus, political consensus around education. I would have wished that education is not even the business of politicians, because 1 + 1 under NDC is 1 + 1 under NPP. And whether or not a government has a particular policy on education would not in reality change the content of what a person needs to know globally. And since we are competing globally, since the market space is globally, since the service space is globally, Ghana has just signed on to the African Continental Free Trade Agreement. And one of the core provisions of that particular agreement is that there's a mutual recognition of licenses, for example, where you can practice your service area in any jurisdiction within Africa. Look, we are getting to a point, and this is one thing, for example, that hardly has any space in the media. We're getting to a point where the real challenges of unemployment will not actually be within. They will be coming from without. The question is, how prepared are we? We live in a world today where machine learning and the onset of AI is virtually threatening what computers threatened apparently in the 90s, where if you do not have a certain dexterity to those challenges, such as the ability to use robots and all that in the employment space, may affect the overall numbers of how many people are employed. The point I'm just trying to make is that we need to get to a point where we recognize that education is so important that at any given point in time, on the core aspects of education, there must be political consensus. There was a time when the SHS was 3 years. There was a time when it quickly became 4 years. And then within a very short time, it became 3 years again. And then it went back again to 4 years, if I remember, and we're back to 3 years. Those inconsistencies, and I'm glad we have the ministers here, and of course, government is trying to do something about them. Look, let's face it, free SHS has come to stay, period.
Yeah.
I don't think that it's possible to go back, and therefore, there must be a recognition of where we are. There must also, therefore, be an absence of detraction, a tendency to undermine. And I genuinely hope that there's no tendency, and I'm not making any casting any aspersions. But the point is, we must recognize that we stand at a point where we must support. Now, as we are supporting, and I'm glad, and I think if I hear from the NDC side, I think the position I hear is that it will be maintained.
Yeah, it will
now,
be.
assuming that is the case, we must get to the point where we must all now begin devising mechanisms to improve on the free SHS.
Any suggestions as to how it can be improved?
Well, I think Bright has suggested something. I think that one of the problems that we've had in the educational space for some time is that there has really not been an investment. Look, if my numbers are right, my information is that we have about 40% of our budget going into education. But in reality, the question is, what is the efficient deployment of that 40%? Yeah. And so these are questions we must start looking at. The leakage, the destinations, the intention vis-a-vis the execution. We must look at these key issues to improve on the secondary education. Now, I said this because lately, and we thank WhatsApp in particular, a lot of the secondary schools are being improved largely through old boysms and old students associations. I think that's a good thing that government can harness. But moving on beyond that, we must start looking really at how the resources in education are deployed so that, I believe that the free SHS policy is a fantastic policy. And again, given what the minister said, we cannot have a significant number of our children outside the educational scope. And so a policy that makes it free, that ensures that people do not have to worry about how much they're paying before going to school, can hardly be criticized. But the question is, how do we ensure that the resources that are allocated to that space are efficiently and effectively deployed so that intentions actually match outcomes? In the circumstances of what we have today, I think there are still a few problems that have to be done.
And before Edutu comes in, and I'll go to my audience, and I'm going to do a lot of interaction with my audience on this. My producers have done the checking of the PISA controversy. 2015, Ghana didn't feature at all. It's the Dominican Republic that was at the bottom of it. And so that's the fact. Mr. Edutu.
Okay, thank you for the opportunity. There are a certain number of issues that we have to look at here. I've talked about the issue that we need to have access, quality, and relevance. We've dealt with access as a country for the most part, but we have not. We are just scratching the surface when it comes to quality. So invariably, when we are comparing ourselves to Sierra Leone and we are better than them, that's okay. But even in that, we have to begin to look at what is happening to our math scores, for example. This year was the first year where we have a 65% pass rate on mathematics. Never happened before. And I'll share the credit with my colleague. And that's what I don't understand. I don't think we should come here and make NDC look bad so that MPP will look good. If you did something and it was good, secondary education improvement project, we came and we continue. I'll commend you publicly for that. Why do you have to always look for the negatives and then lament and say that you did something poor? No, that is not the kind of politics we want in this country. When you do something good, look at E-blocks. You completed 33 and operationalized them. When we came, we completed 25. You can go ahead and take credit for it that you started it and we completed, but don't say that we have abandoned them. When we do that, we are not creating confidence in Ghanaian people to begin to understand that we, the political leaders of this country, can do a better job for them. And this is where I'm starting from, that we need to begin to look at what is right. What is right is right. My brother said something profound about free senior high school. It's something that has come to stay. Now, some people will have problems about double track and its implementation. And I always tell people, I've worked in that system. I worked in it for about 10 years. And it was deployed even in the United States of America when resources were limited. And they had to address the influx of immigrants from Mexico, and so the fact that in California, they had changed high school from 3 to 4 years. They used this system, addressed it, and about 10 years, they got rid of it when they raised money and built schools. Now, Nana Addo Dankwa Akufo-Addo promised that within 5 to 7 years, he will eliminate double track. Now, as a consequence, we now have been able to raise through GetFund $1.5 billion for infrastructure expansion in this country. 500 million is already at work. Any double track school that you visit today has infrastructure expansion. That is, to your point, we are now expanding the existing schools, not a greenfield development opportunity. Go to any double track school. There are schools under construction now. Some of them have been completed. And those were the areas where every school dormitory that is being finished, it goes with bank beds. It goes with beds. So when you say 13,000 have been sent, they accompanied dormitory blocks that are under construction or have been finished. That is where maybe the 13,000 came in. But the bottom line is this. If you look at the infrastructure expansion that we've embarked upon, in this country, I've always said, when it comes to school infrastructure development, we've always done it the way I always say my father built his house, cocoa farm. At the end of the year, you get some money, you lay a block, you lay it till you get to roofing, maybe 20 years and you finish. That is why you go to high schools across the country, there are so many uncompleted buildings. Now, with the 1.5 billion securitization from GetFund, we are completing these buildings, and we are building new ones. There's no double track school in this country where you not find building ongoing at this point in time. And the whole point is that we'll be able to get rid of double track by GetFund securitization. Instead of waiting for GetFund revenue to come in every year, wherever small amount comes in, you have a contract that has been aside for 10 years, 15 years, and variations and adjustment in prices kills us as a consequence. Now, this money is helping complete the buildings so that it doesn't take you 5 years to complete a building. You can build it. Some people have finished dormitory blocks in 6 months and 8 months, and they are being paid by GetFund in this country. They call them to get their checks. So when you talk about infrastructure, we are doing whatever we need to do to take out the issue of congestion and make sure that students are in the right places. Let me tell you something. Some people think double track has brought about congestion. No, it's the reverse. Before double track, some schools were congested. Now, double track, dividing the students into 3 and allowing only 2 cohorts of students to be at the school, decongested the number of schools. Go to Accra Girls. Classroom that were about 70 students in a class became 50 with the implementation of double track. So double track does not mean double enrollment concurrently. It means dividing your students in 3 cohorts, having 2 of them there at a time so that the dining halls are not congested. So it's not the other way around. It's a solution to the congestion problem. Of course, it allowed us to also enroll more students.
You can wrap it up for me,
Sean,
so I can get my audience.
TVET, that's why I was saying that I don't know which country where I was sitting when my brother was talking glowingly about TVET. TVET, until we came to power, was under 17 ministries. Now they are being aligned to the Ministry of Education. And with that realignment, what it means is that we're now going to have a Director General of TVET, Technical Vocational Education and Training Service, just like Director General of Ghana Education Service, who will be handling all these schools that are now coming to the Ministry of Education. In addition to that, we are changing the TVET curriculum. Recently, we had a sword cutting ceremony at CSIR, where the president cut a sword for the construction of 34 MVTI schools across the country. Those schools that had run down facilities, foundries, and other things are now going to get opportunity to get new equipment and to get new tools. So when you come to TVET, we did not come to meet any TVET transformation, but we are working on it to change that because it has great dividends. We cannot have a continent, Africa, that is not taking advantage of demographic dividends. TVET offers us that opportunity. Now, let me quickly touch on one quick thing before I will leave from here. My brother was talking about the fact that you have internal evaluation systems that are not working, there are no investment in them. I'll tell you this, our system has not been structured in a way sometimes to support the reforms we want to embark upon. I'll give you one example. At the Ministry of Education, so the minister directed that there should be some major reform in terms of the manpower that we have to bring about the transformation that we need. When we came to the ministry, and it has been there, it's not their fault, no, it's the part of the civil service structure. There were no technical experts that could sit you down and brief you on education reform. And it's not like the young men and women there are not willing to learn, but this is what happens. They consider as part of the regular civil service. Therefore, when somebody spends 4 years there, he's transferred to another ministry. Unlike Ministry of Finance and Trade, where there were technical experts, and you stay at the ministry for all your life until maybe sometime they can transfer you back, and that's a unique situation. So you come to the Ministry of Education, who were the technical experts? That is why when they did the SIF, they had to bring in technical experts sometimes from abroad. Ministry of Education did not have the technical experts. My minister scheduled a meeting with the head of civil service. At that meeting, it was agreed that we are going to hire 16 technical experts at the director level who would then be able to have the historical memory in order to embark on any reform that we're doing.
Now they are starting work.
Now they are in place.
They are in place. Okay.
They are in place and they are being
I want to quickly bring in my audience now, and I'm delighted to say that the landlord is already here with us. Everybody's watching who that is. Professor Abednego Amate, thank you very much for agreeing to use your facility. And we haven't spoken much about tertiary education. But you are in a tertiary institution, and so I think, and also Professor Hinkson is here. The microphone, you have a microphone, Prof, and so if you have a contribution to make, I'll gladly hear it. And the question is all about, I'm just curious, the question now, bring in the tertiary part of this, and whether all this pre-tertiary conversation, how is that impacting on the tertiary? Are you getting quality from there? Because that feeds the tertiary. Is the quality coming in for you, and how is that making the education that you churn out relevant? Because you've been bastardized as, training people who can really, I'm not fit for purpose, etc. And so, if you want to ask a question, please get to the microphones. Just come to the microphone. Just come to the microphones. And you have a microphone, Prof. Yes, you can contribute. Kindly put the microphones on for me, please. Yes, go on. I think it's on. If it's not on, they will fix it for you. They're on. Go on. Yeah.
So, thank you very much. He spoke about cosmetic and substantial reforms. It was very profound that you had to use the marriage of NAB and NCT as your focal point. And
casual example.
Interesting example, though, because around that same conversation, sometime middle of this year, there was also the issue about private universities will now not have public universities as their mothers and fathers, and they'll be on their own, and so on and so forth. So the larger issue for me is, I've heard now we are supposed to build some new blocks because double track is coming, and so we need more classrooms to employ more lecturers. But I would need some clarity as well regarding where the tertiary trajectory is going, especially because you raised the point about technical education again. I know they just finished an audit of the HR needs of this country. I hear it's not been launched, so I'm not supposed to talk about it. But that for me will be a very profound basis to now plan going forward, so that we get the best mix of what do we need and where? Because if you're expanding facilities at Legon or at Kivas or Winneba, it's good to accommodate double track. But as a country, is there a codified strategy regarding what we need to see 10 years from now in terms of the human capital mix? And how do the tertiary education feed into that equation? I'm not too clear, maybe you help me. But then there's a larger issue, which is the funding issue. So you spoke about $70,000 policy, something. Okay. In the UK, for instance, they have something they call the International Higher Education Strategy, where by 2035, they are looking to raise maybe $60 billion from international students as well. By that same year, they should be receiving 600,000 international students every year. Now, because funding is so tricky, it will be interesting to also find out. We are talking about passing universities bail, and there was a lot of to and fro recently about who won't do it, who do it. The lecturers say they don't like, they like, and the minister will say we'll do it. Around that discourse, I've been happy to hear something around an international higher education strategy to get a sense of how many Gambians do we want? How many Sierra Leoneans do we want? Because while somebody will pay, maybe 3,000 cedis to come to school here, the Gambian will pay $7,000, $8,000. Those sort of discussions are also not being had. Maybe they'll be had eventually. But if you mix double track with you need money and international students, maybe the minister can help me with what exactly is going on in that space. Because I think the discussions are very mundane. But we need to look 10 years from now and get a sense of where we are going, what the resource commitments will be, and what codified strategy we seem to be following. He also wants to add on.
No, just briefly. I want to take a quick one from the IHEB. That's the Deputy General Secretary for NAT in charge of administration. Yeah, so he has a question. I'll come back to you.
Yes, thank you very much, and I'm enjoying the debate. But you see, the challenge we have as a trade union is that much attention has not been paid to the teacher and the teacher needs, especially in every community in Ghana you find a teacher. We are building schools. How many of them visit, especially in the very remote schools, do we have teacher accommodation? Even the senior high schools that we are talking about, the E-Block and others, you go there, the whole school built in an isolated community, no single bungalow being for the head teacher. How do we move on with this? We believe that all the reforms that we are talking about, all the beautiful things that we are talking about, stops at the doorstep of the teacher. How is the teacher being involved, being motivated to ensure that all these things work out?
Fantastic question. Just before you go, the licensure examinations have become very controversial. NAT's position is what? Are you going to, when are you starting the exams and are you for it?
Already, there are discussions ongoing on the fee that has to be charged. I think last week
But you are for the policy?
Sure, we are for it.
So you write the license?
We will write.
Is the question is about the fee, how much you pay for it?
The fees and who to pay.
What is it now?
If minister can give it to us as our Christmas bonus, we'll be very grateful to hear that.
So NAT, you want to write it for free?
Yes, if it is, it's very fine because we become professionals.
Because there's a controversy about whether it's necessary. The NDC's position is that they will cancel it. You don't need to write licensure exams. Well, your position is that you like it.
Yes, we feel that, yes, you see, in Ghana, we all hear of a fake lawyer being arrested. True. Have you ever heard of a fake teacher? No. But there are plenty of them. But sometimes these SHS graduates who go and teach people even in their homes, when they go and defile a student, they say a teacher has defiled the child. So we want these benchmarks to be dealt with, especially in the private schools, so that the teacher will have some important.
Fantastic. Thank you very much. That's very progressive. And there was a comment that was going to come from here. Yes. Oh, Jemima. Jemima has a comment. And then I'll come to the aisle. And I'd like to quickly acknowledge again that we're also here with the Pro-Vice Chancellor of the UPSA, Charles Barnum. Mr. Barnum, thank you very much for also joining us. Great, for making this possible for us. Yes?
Mine's just a very quick question. One of the scandals, let's say, that rocked our education sector was the sex for grades. Yeah. I'm sure you all know. And I wanted to get the viewpoint, since it wasn't slated for any discussion, I wanted to get the viewpoint of our panel members to exactly how they think about it. You know, how can we sanitize our education system, so our pupils and students are not fearful for their safety, and there's none of this kind of sexual harassment or any kind of quid pro quo things going on.
Fantastic one, actually. And we'll add to that the CSC, the Comprehensive Strategic Education controversy as well. I mean, so that they can get a quick comment on that. Yes, Doc.
Yeah, just a quick one. I think I just want to come back to the policy coherence issue, because we're making a lot of investments, definitely with free SHS. Now, when you look at the National Education Assessment, the learning outcomes for primary, I mean, how are we going to, because how are we going to bridge the gap? Because if the foundation is not strong, if people coming out of primary school are not able to properly read and write, do well on math and so on, I mean, if they go to secondary school, we're really creating problems. So there's finite resources. So I just wanted to find out what is the strategy in say, the next 10 years. I haven't read the education policy, so I don't know how we are combining, these objectives, and even talking about kindergarten and preschool and so on and so forth. I think there's, for some of us, when we sit here, we can't really see the picture. So maybe if they can help us.
Yeah, clarifying the picture for the next 10 years. I'll come to that. There's a lot. I want to wrap up here, and then we'll go to legal education as a final one. But I want to take two quickly and make it brief for me.
Yeah, thank you very much. I'm Daniel Blizanan Jr., Director of Communications for the Dynamic Youth Movement of Ghana. My question goes to the Deputy Minister for Education. With respect to the World Bank report on the Human Capital Index, in 2018, we ranked 116 out of 157 countries, casting a damning verdict on Ghana's poor quality education. As I speak to you, in 2019, we have been ranked last but one, beating only...
That's false. That's fake. This hasn't come out.
What's the source again?
The 2019 one is fake. It's going around
the World Bank report.
No,
you can access
that
World Bank report is
it is published by Graphic Online.
No, it's fake.
No, that's
2019
fake.
That's fake. Okay, so
but my point is,
we agree.
That must be fake indeed.
My point.
It must be fake indeed.
My point.
Repremise your question. Ask it very briefly in 30 seconds.
My point still maintains. If the 2019 report is fake, going back to 2018. We are ranked 106 out of 157 countries.
Okay. And the question is?
The question is, it casts a damning impact on the poor quality of education. What practical, radical processes in respect to policies that the NPP government is putting in place to ameliorate these difficulties at the basic level?
Thank you very much. Yes, sir. Very briefly, sir.
Yes, Evans, I'm Jonas Tinkering. I'm a teacher at Spoon Presby Basic B.
Great.
A few things here, really. I know you want me to be very fast. I'm going to be very brief.
Because I need to get.
But then the challenge is that I'm a basic school teacher. Yeah. And one of the problems we actually have this term, and it's not just been this term, last term as well, we wrote examination, and sometimes we were not so sure as to whether the examination was actually going to be written. Now, we came back from strike, and then immediately afterwards, we were directed that capitation grants from the lower primary and kindergarten, of course inclusive, are supposed to be used to run the examination. Now the challenge is, who actually sets the questions? Who is setting the questions? You wait till the 14th week or whatsoever, whether it's 11th week or whatever. If Jonas is teaching A, C, Q, and then Kweku Menu is teaching B, D, Z, which one are we actually setting the questions on?
At what level is this? And this is end of term?
It's on the JHS level.
Okay.
And so, fine, you want parents not
the question I'm asking,
my challenge is that my challenge is that, you see, let's not assume, our politicians should not assume this machoistic sort of, demeanor that we can do everything and anything just because we are in power.
Thank you very much.
And I think it is critical that we
one from here, and then I'll come to the audience. Yeah, it may be impossible to take all of you, so I'll come back for one last round. You may take your seat whilst you do that, and then, but finally, yes, 30 seconds.
Thank you. My name is Enyo Luchu, Ghanaian. Two short ones, one for the media and one for the panel. You see that when you are listening to them, everybody is giving a quote. Sometimes when you sit by the telly, in fact, Newsfile is my breakfast. If I don't take it, I cannot survive. So when I was watching it and I realized that it was here, I just shut the TV down and rushed down here. Thank you very much. One shot for the media. Sometimes when you say by the media, NDC will be giving some figures and trying to defend it. NPP will be giving some figures and try to defend it. Then, excuse me to say, the host, which is the media, become a spectator, just moderating the two. You should have a fact sheet. For example, they say the GDP of Ghana in 2016 was so and so. They say no, it was reverted to 2013, so that there was upgrade. Which is which? So you, the media, should have a fact sheet. When NDC says something is wrong, you say no. With this source, with this fact sheet, it's wrong.
Great.
When
and that is why if you listen to us, we have fact checking every Wednesday.
Oh.
So that addresses that. Sometimes you can't do it in real time because you have to get it right. And as you've noticed on PISA, as we've been talking, they came to me with the facts and I put it out. And so that's not a problem at all. Can I go to the next one?
The next problem is with our education. Yeah. I was once educationist. Look at the Ghana, for example, our educational system. In relation to even the government policy, one district, one factory, or industrialization, education or workforce is supposed to be in the form of a pyramid or a triangle, whereby the workforce is the big base and the managerial level is the apex top. Take the basic level, the JSS and the SSS. As they grow up through that system, to now they have to end up at tertiary. Because when you finish at SSS, you are not skilled. You can't do anything unless you go to tertiary.
And the question is?
And the problem is, tertiary too, it becomes a managerial level in terms of workforce. So the vocational and technical education should be very paramount at the middle level. That's the SHS.
For those of you who can get
so if you are from the JSS, the same quantity of the SS schools in the country should be the same equivalent to the vocational and technical education. So that from that level, whether you're able to go to university or not, you are properly equipped to fit into the job market.
Fantastic contribution. I'm grateful. I want to come back. Those standing, please kindly take your seat so that when we return, you could come back to the microphones. Yes, Mr. Duchu, and I'll come to my panelists who also answer a few
I think there's been a number of questions.
Yes. Very briefly, brief answers.
The education strategic plan, which NDC started and we continued, is what is driving education in this country. So the strategic plan has so many stakeholder consultations and events, and it was finalized under our watch, but it was started by NDC, and which begins from 2018 to 2030. Now, pieces of that are then taken out and implemented in various policies. For example, there was a talk about what happens to the basic when you have a senior high school and so many things are happening. Out of the education strategic plan, now we have Ghana Accountability for Learning Outcomes project. And under this project, we are sourcing over 100 million, 160 million, which is then going to be used in revamping 10,000 low-performing basic schools across the country. So these are resources beyond the budget. That is going to help us do that. One critical aspect that excites me is setting up a national assessment plan. What has happened over the years is this. We have EGRA and EGMA, and you do that, randomized group. Not all students were assessed across the country. In other jurisdictions where education has succeeded, all students are assessed at certain critical levels and gentures. You use that assessment data to then do intervention. So beginning next year, we have a national assessment program that is going to test all students in primary 2 across the country, primary 4. Then if the students have deficiency in reading and writing in primary 2, you have primary 3 to do intervention. That is when you'll be able to know that Kokrobite Primary School is not doing well, therefore there's a need for intervention. As it is now, it takes 11 years for us to do our first assessment, which is BEC. It is at that point that we'll be able to know that some students were not doing well, and it's too late for those students. So, but when you begin the national assessment, primary 2, if they are not reading at grade level, you have intervention opportunity. Parents will get results from the schools, as is done in other jurisdictions. Ghana Education Service will then have data to embark upon reforming their schools, so that you don't have the students boxed in there for 11 years and then they fail the BEC and oh, the score is so bad. Same thing applies to WASI. When you look at the fact that there's lack of intervention in our schools, a student walks into a high school, you have come. But that does not mean that student is ready to do high school academic work. What it means is that you do your initial assessment, and that is what the intervention grant that we sent to schools last year is about. And based on that, we actually borrow the best practice from Wesley Girls, where after students are enrolled, they have an initial assessment, and based on that, they begin then to do intervention for the students so that the student doesn't fail. We've created a sink or swim system where you go in, you are informed one. For example, you're doing home economics, you're doing management in living and all these courses, but we know for a fact that you can read, and we know for a fact that you can write. Why don't we provide intervention so that that student can then cope with the level of content that is being given? And that is something that we have begun. Now, when you talk about, I think there was something about the poor quality. When you talk about what the Human Capital Index, and yes, we were told, and it's true, that the reason why Human Capital Index is low, even though at the African level we are one of the best, is that if we change the quality of teaching and learning, we will not be talking about Africa. We'll be competing with the rest of the world. And they said that quality of teaching and learning is so bad that instead of 11 years, because they don't include senior high school. In fact, we've told the World Bank, the minister has directed that we set up a committee to look at how they even come up with a harmonized test scores. But to begin with, we are accepting what they are telling us. And based on what they are telling us, what they are saying is that the effective schooling years is 5.6 instead of 11. So which means that children go to school and they don't learn. And that is why you need an IB that does not do for 40 in a year. This year, at minimum, they are doing 4,800. But even that is not enough. What we need to do, and this is what we are doing, circuit supervisors are now going to be support team. And they are not going there to get the school, they are going there to help the school. So what we are saying is this: under the new supervision regime, when you do your national assessment, then we know your school is doing well or not doing well. Inspectors will be deployed, support team will be deployed, so that we can turn around the fortunes of the school. Also, if we do not train our school leaders, we are going to see the same thing. You see, you get promoted as a headmaster, head teacher, not based on how effective you are. It's based on how many years have you taught, and are you an assistant director?
So that has changed now?
Oh, yes, okay. It's changing, seriously.
Can you please address the teachers' concern for me before we wrap up?
Which one?
The concerns about you're providing accommodation for the students, but there's no welfare issues there for the teachers as well.
Yes, my colleague, once a teacher was a teacher, so that's my colleague.
Yes.
Yeah, and I want to tell you this. Yes, we need to do more. We need to do more in providing teacher accommodation. We got funding from Kuwaiti Fund, and we are building some, what do you call it, not dormitories, but housing for teachers in selected senior high schools. But I'll take your message in good faith and know that we need to do more. If teachers are not comfortable and don't have a place to stay, how can they wake up excited the next day to go and teach? So yes, we need to do more as a ministry.
They also want to write the licensure exams free.
That is something that is beyond my pay scale, so I'll take it up.
Okay.
I wish I could have pronounced it and it's done, but
okay.
I'll be in trouble if I do.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much. The planning,
the trajectory is, in terms of funding, this is what we are looking at. The 1.5 billion that we have sourced from GET Fund, a large proportion of it is supposed to go into tertiary infrastructure. But as you said, I think if you look at the education strategic plan, there was a serious recommendation that we look at our skills needs assessment. Part of it has been done by the COGVET, which is in charge of technical and vocational education. But they did not do it for all the various trades. I think they focus on the technical and vocational aspect. But we need to have a comprehensive view of what is going on and what we need. So we don't have a situation where our students are just going to school. And I think if we had a comprehensive view, we're also going to go back and look at our curriculum. For example, somebody completes high school and he did visual arts. I always tell a story that if Kojo Mensah did visual arts as high school, and one day he has a dream, and God was telling him that, Kojo Mensah, you are going to be the world's best engineer. He will say, God, you don't know. I'm a visual arts student. We have visual arts students, the most creative and talented. They can look at you and draw. You can draw bridges, design cars, right? Draw cars. But they are the ones that we say can never be engineers in this country. If we knew of the needs for engineers and the number, then we'll be able to rethink and say, why don't you allow them? Let them do 1 year access course in physics and mathematics, and then you bring them in. So that is critical, and I think we need to do that.
We have a few minutes to wrap up. Yes, a quick, brief comment, and I'll come to Bright, and then I'll end with Kofi on the legal education.
Evans, lots of issues. Let me commend the minister for continuing with the education strategic plan. Except to also add that the Kuwaiti fund he talked about, I thought he would have remembered to add that I negotiated the fund. In the spirit of sharing credit, in the spirit of sharing credit. So when the teachers get their dormitories, they should know who negotiated the fund with the Kuwaitis.
I like that better than saying we've abandoned it.
but on a more serious note, I think that, you see, we should revisit the matter of double track. All the literature is clear. It is not a solution. And if you look at the 2019 budget, the 2020 budget, you don't see radical allocation of resources to end that. And you see, I say that, and I keep making this point, and I'm glad that Bright Simmons emphasized it, about learning, that we don't learn as a country. If you take the MS data, this is not the highest increase in enrollment in recent years. The highest was in 2010, the 2010-2011 academic year, when the 3-year, 4-year, increase happened of the duration under President Kufuor. When President Mills came in 2009, he noticed that the 3-year batch will continue to be in school, will be in the 4th year, and first years will come on stream. The increase, according to MS data, was 184,204, the highest in our recent history. What Professor Mills did, God bless his soul, was to carry out an emergency infrastructure expansion in 500 secondary schools, dormitories, classrooms, and the teachers are here. They'll confirm that. And we avoided double track. Double track is a lazy man's approach to addressing this matter. And we must be bold about it, say it, and say that we cannot accept this double track system.
Do you say the creative man's approach? Or
the lazy man's approach. That's why even in the United States of America, where it was piloted, they abandoned it. And check the results. No, but we the results. If you look at the educational outcomes, it's not impressive.
Try and wrap it up for me.
So learning. Let us learn. If we had followed the Professor Mills blueprint for the 2010-2011 academic year, we would not be implementing double track.
Right.
Then on the
very briefly, because we need to.
You see, the NAT leader who said that they would want to write. I don't know if he's speaking for all of them, because we have met the unions, we've met NAGRAT, we've met, and I don't get the impression that they are happy with the licensure exams. You see, if you look at Act 778, sections 9 to 12, which talks about licensing teachers to give them that professional credibility has nothing to do with examinations. What we piloted at Shai Osudoku was to look at the practical aspect, pedagogy, the method of teaching. A 2-year program you assessed based on in the field. You see, this country, we think everything is about examinations. It's not. And then after that, you receive your license. That was our program, which I had thought will be continued.
So that's a proposal.
So our proposal is that we are not going to insist on examinations. Licensing is different from licensure examinations. So the way forward is to focus on pedagogy, the practical method of teaching. And that's what we are going to do. We are going to abolish national service. We are going to abolish this no automatic, promotion, and rather focus on in-service training. Building the capacity of teachers.
Let me go to Bright.
And so many other issues, but
final comments on the
agree
questions that come. Yeah.
Well, so first of all, I think...
I don't know if you can comment on Dr. Jibama Nunu's comment about the controversy surrounding the sexual harassment in the tertiary education that, I don't know where we left off, the investigations have conducted, but generally reforms across the tertiary to deal with that.
So, I mean, Dr. Nunu is obviously right. We tend to want to use criminal rules of evidence for everything in this country. So unless I can bring video evidence, etc., etc. But these are matters where you have a presumption against consent. If somebody is in authority and is even dating a student, your assumption should be that the person's standing in authority is perhaps been abused. So we have to start off with suspicion. The corollary of that is therefore then we cannot also publicize people's names, because people do have a genuine right to some degree of dignity. So we have to balance the two by having a very strong presumption against consent, but at the same time use anonymity as a way to protect both parties until we've resolved the matter. I want to make the point that sometimes when we speak on these kind of panels, we get emotional. And I recognize that a few moments ago, I was deeply emotional. And now that I think about it, I want to apologize to the audience if I went a bit overboard. But the concerns that have arisen on this panel kind of tells us again this challenge that I have about the ability to plan in an atmosphere of true rigor, where we don't have these assumptions about somebody's NDC, NPP, and all of this stuff that prevents true public debate from being rigorous. I mean, those of us that insist that we can have true public debate that is extremely rigorous, and do so without any partisan ill will whatsoever towards any of the parties, consistently struggle when we live in an environment where every time you try to be critical, the assumption is that you must have some ill motive. I think that's a big problem. Going back to this issue around the concerns that have arisen, I think civil society has to do a better job of mediating between the political factions. To my mind, they're becoming too powerful. It's getting to a point where we are unable, at this point, of doing anything about the polarization. It's either your NPP or your NDC, and very little in between. The role of people like us, the role of people like Professor Prempe and Sante and the rest that are here, should be that we serve that purpose of being arbitrators. It's going to be very important going forward. In the case of double track as an example, yes, it's indeed the case that in California in particular, in North Carolina and elsewhere, there's been extensive use of double track and multi-tracking as an example. It's not just double track. There's multiple ways you can do it. Year-round education and the rest of it. In Compact 6 that we've seen in California for many years, there has been a tendency to use it to address issues about overcrowding, congestion, resource. But some people have also used that for curriculum development when you can increase instruction time and contact hours. The problem that I've raised in our specific context is that we seem to think that the CAPEX abolition, the ability to reduce the CAPEX burden necessarily mean, therefore, that we can save resources in this intermediate period without taking into account the OPEX that arises as an example. Let me give you a very
briefly, because I need to wrap up.
We are going to try and recruit 9,000 teachers. Now, if you look at their medium-term plan, they intend to increase the number of teachers in secondary school to about 50,000. The truth is that if they then continue along the current plan of having about 2 million students, teacher to student ratio is going to dramatically collapse. Maybe 1 to 40 or something like that. And the truth of the matter is that you need to invest to address that. And you just start investing now. So the attempt to create the impression that double track somehow can help you circumvent the resource constraint is not entirely accurate if you truly become rigorous.
Let me bring in Kofi, on legal education. The CJ at the vetting hinted that there's a lot of work already happening, and you are involved in that, to try and fix the problems identified with the mass failure and increasing access, etc. If you can bullet for us the roadmap that you propose to fix some of the key block issues in there.
Well, if you mean my personal suggestion.
Oh, yeah, of course.
Yes, because yes, I'm doing some work with the presumptive CJ in that respect, but not generally at the level of the reform, generally speaking. The point is this: I think that there is the need to listen to both sides of the story. Now, both sides of the story is the students who are affected. These students must be listened to. They've been treated as objects, but they have to be treated as subjects. They are two different things. Number two, it's important to recognize that until 2003, legal education has been frozen in time. So for 53 years, there was only one faculty of law in Ghana. And then in 2003, KNUST came on board. Since then, we have had an exponential growth in faculties of law, and indeed there has been some dampening as far as the growth in law schools are concerned. And part of the reason for that, I think, is all these uncertainties we have in admission to the law school. But the reality is that there must be some reform. The problem is the current state of the reform itself needs reforming. The victims, however, of the entire circumstances of what we experience today are the students. The students have no clarity on the exam. They have no clarity on who is setting the exam. Maybe that they don't need to have clarity, but they have no clarity on the exam. They have no clarity on what to expect. They have no clarity on a number of things. Now, they're writing two key exams. They write one exam for admission to the law school, and then they write an exit exam. The problem with this is that the exit exam is, truly speaking, not an exit exam. It is a progressional exam. In other words, you are admitted to the law school, part one, and then you go into part two, and then you pass the part two exam, then you become a lawyer. Now, these two are progressional. They are not exit exams. Exit exams, as known in many jurisdictions, are one-time exams that you actually sit. So you apply to sit for a New York bar or California bar, the two popular ones, and you pass them, and that's it. Nobody really cares which law school you attended. But in this case, you are admitted to a physical space called the Ghana Law School. Now, I dare say that that is one subject nobody's touching. And the reason nobody's touching that is for political propriety. Now, when I say political propriety, this is one time when I don't mean NDC MPP. But I mean, it's politically a difficult subject to speak of. And the reason it is because you may probably go into the corner in which you have to admit that the law school may have outlived its usefulness. Because once you put people in a physical space, some must go for others to come. And there have been reality in the past of cases in which a certain number of students failed a particular exam, and the key question was asked, if they do not go, there can be no admission for the next batch to come into that space. Now, if you have all these complications, then you're going to invariably have that scenario of having an entry exam, which is what we have at the moment. That you apply to be admitted to the Ghana Law School, you write one major exam. People are failing an exam to enter. And for many people, it makes no sense, because people should be worried about leaving, i.e. the exit exam. But if you are worried about even entering, then that's a problem. Now, the uncertainties at the entry point are as high as the uncertainties at the exit point. There are cases in which students have written exams and they've come out complaining that they are not sure whether this paper was a criminal law paper or was a law of evidence paper. We have trained students over the years to think in categories. And so it's very difficult for them to go out there and sometimes see some of these complications. The long and short is that we have a reform that appears to have left students behind. Now, in the process, when people lack information, rumors reign galore. So we have situations in which there are all kinds of rumors and allegations about all kinds of things, and by the time I'm done saying these things I'm saying here, I'll be in trouble when I go out. You will never make a statement on the reform of legal education and win, because you end up almost always affecting one side, and somehow you get twisted. The truth of the matter is that the reform needs to take account of issues of transparency. Students must have a sense of what to expect. The reform needs to take account of training. I'm talking about the reform in the state in which it is. Training of the teachers themselves. So the teachers who are teaching the students are themselves, they themselves don't seem to have clarity, if you like, on the content or the syllabus for which they're supposed to deliver on. Because the questions that are set in the exam sometimes appear to be out of sync with what is being taught. So there are all kinds of discrepancies, there are all kinds of inconsistencies, and invariably the biggest victim in all these are the students. Now, the presumptive Chief Justice, maybe, and I can say for a fact on this, I've been honored to work quite closely with him on this. He's very passionate about the reform. And he is very critical about a number of things that are happening or may be happening from all the various angles. And I am quite confident that indeed when eventually, even when eventually he's made a Chief Justice, I'm quite confident that the reform may see some energy, a new lease of energy being injected.
So we're likely to see the reforms.
Right. There's so much I can say. There's so much to say, but there's so much I can say because of time.
Yeah, yes. Okay. I'm grateful, gentlemen. We are run out of time on this. We have to move on to the next one. A round of applause for yourselves, ladies and gentlemen. And in fact, we can have the next 3 hours talking about education because it's such a broad subject, but time constraints means we have to end it at this point for the next conversation to commence on the financial sector crisis. And the next after that will be where the politicians will do what they do best. We'll have John Boydu and